Before the noise, before the light, before mankind raised its first trembling fire into the void, there was silence. Not emptiness, but a deep, patient quiet that filled the gulf between stars. Galaxies turned like slow wheels. Nebulae drifted in colors unseen by mortal eyes, and the ancient light of the first suns passed uncounted through the cold. In that silence, whole ages lived and died without witness. It was in one such forgotten corner of the galaxy that a world burned too brightly. Its star, young, angry, and cruel, shed not warmth but death. Its rays scorched the surface of its planets, flaying life from stone, aging flesh before its time. And on the third world from that sun beneath the cracked and lightning-streaked sky lived the Necron tier. They were not yet machines, nor gods, nor the cold immortals the galaxy would come to fear. They were fragile, painfully mortal, a species whose lives flickered and faded in what seemed moments compared to the long ages of the stars. Their skin bore the mark of radiation, their bones were brittle before age, and their spirits, though proud, carried the constant weight of resentment. For they could look upward, they could see eternity shining above them, endless and untouchable. And they hated it. Their cities were towers of glass and metal, built not from hope, but from defiance. Their architects shaped monuments that reached for the heavens, as if sheer height might defy decay. And in the dim glow of their dying sun, they learned to bind matter, to bend energy, to conquer every weakness of their flesh except the final one: time. The Necrontyr Empire was born not from ambition, but from grief. Dynasties rose and ruled over worlds of sand and light, their banners of black and bronze fluttering in a sky that never softened. They conquered for no joy, colonized for no peace. They sought only escape from their star, from their frailty, from the truth that every breath was a step closer to death. Their rulers, the Pharaons, promised salvation. They built fleets that sailed through radiation storms, ships that carried their sorrow to the stars. They found other worlds, colder, darker, safer, and claimed them all in the name of their survival. And with every conquest, their bitterness grew sharper. For they found others, other species, other civilizations whose lives were measured not in decades but in eons. Beings who walked through centuries as the Necron tier aged and died. Among them were the Old Ones, beings of impossible mastery who moved through space like thoughts, who could mold life as easily as sculptors mold clay. They seeded worlds with life, tended it and guided it toward balance. The Necrontyr watched, and envy burned hotter than their sun. They despised the Old Ones, not for cruelty but for indifference. These immortals cared nothing for the suffering of those who looked upon them from below. They lived in timelessness, untouched by decay, while the Necrontyr perished in their thousands beneath a single sunrise. It was unbearable. Their hatred of death became a faith all its own. They studied the stars until their knowledge touched madness. They learned that their sun, their executioner, could also be their teacher. From its radiation they drew energy. From its chaos they extracted patterns. They learned to build machines that outlasted lifetimes and tombs that would never rust. But still their flesh betrayed them. Some among them began to speak of vengeance, not merely against death, but against the very order of the cosmos. They whispered that the Old Ones had stolen immortality for themselves, hoarding it behind the veil of their godlike science. And so, in the shadow of the dying sun, the Necrontyr built their greatest monument, not of stone, but of purpose. They would defy the gods themselves. Their wars spread through the stars like cracks through glass. Worlds burned, fleets vanished, and empires broke against the invisible wall of time. Every victory was temporary, every triumph hollow. No matter how far they reached, the Necrontyr remained bound by decay. They lived short lives in long shadows, and still the Old Ones endured, ageless, serene, unconcerned, Yet even the oldest stars can be deceived. In the farthest reaches of their empire, the Necrontyr discovered something older than gods, a presence that slept within the heart of suns, not life, but awareness. They called them the Citan, the star gods, beings of pure energy and hunger, radiant and terrible. Through instruments and experiments that defied reason, the Necrontyr gave these entities form. Bodies of living metal, shaped by their will. They believed they had found allies, perhaps even salvation. In that moment, destiny shifted. The galaxy trembled, though it did not yet know why. The Necrontyr looked upon their creations and saw beauty, gods made manifest, their forms gleaming like polished gold, their power beyond comprehension. They named them Deceiver, Nightbringer, Void Dragon, and 1,000 others. The Citan spoke in whispers that burned through the mind, promising eternal life, vengeance, perfection. They spoke of a way to escape the tyranny of flesh, and for a race whose every heartbeat was pain, that promise was enough. The Necrontyr followed their new gods willingly. They built temples that touched the clouds and monuments that swallowed mountains. The skies glowed with artificial aurorae as their forges burned day and night, crafting the instruments of their own deliverance. They believed they stood upon the edge of transcendence, that they would rise from mortality into eternity, and finally silence their envy forever. But in the quiet between stars, even now, the galaxy seemed to hesitate, as if the void itself drew breath, waiting for what came next. It was an age before the fall, before the great wars, before the sleep, before the endless green glow that would one day haunt the dark. The Necrontyr looked upward still, hating their sun, envying the stars, and dreaming of a time when they would burn brighter than both. In the age before eternity, when the stars still whispered in warmth, the Necrontyr waged their most bitter war, not against empires nor gods, but against their own fragile flesh. They were a people cursed from the moment of their birth. Their world, scorched beneath the venomous light of a dying sun, gave them little mercy. Radiation poured from the heavens like poison, seeping into bone and blood. Children were born coughing, skin marked by burns that never healed. The strong grew frail before their time, and the old, what few there were, watched their final sunsets through the fog of sickness. Their lives were short, but their hatred long. Every Necrontyr carried within them a wound that could not close. The knowledge that existence itself was unfair. They saw other races rise and thrive on gentler worlds, their lives long and peaceful. They saw the old ones, radiant and unaging, shaping life as they pleased. And in that contrast, the Necrontyr saw only mockery. They built great archives to study death. Their scholars dissected time itself, mapping its cruelty with a precision that bordered on madness. Every disease, every mutation, every broken atom became an enemy to be catalogued and conquered. But no matter what they discovered, the same truth remained. The flesh was weak. The sun would always win. Across the empire, this truth took root like a plague. Where other civilizations built temples to celebrate life, the Necrontyr built tombs. They worshipped endurance, not joy, memory, not hope. Their art was the art of preservation, faces carved into stone, voices recorded in crystal, dreams buried in vaults of silver so they might outlive their dreamers. Their technology advanced with terrifying speed. They learned to manipulate matter at the atomic level, to forge alloys that resisted decay. They built machines that could think, that could remember their masters long after the masters had turned to dust. Entire cities gleamed beneath black suns, monuments to defiance. But even as their hands shaped wonders, their bodies betrayed them. Their frailty could not be conquered by science alone. And so desperation gave birth to obsession. Among the dynasties, whispers began to spread of transcendence, of abandoning flesh altogether. The idea took hold like a fever. The greatest minds of the Necrontyr gathered in secret conclaves, speaking of a future where death had no dominion. Some dreamed of energy bodies, of pure thought, of transference into machines. Others sought to bind their essence to constructs, to imprison the soul in vessels of living metal. But no matter the path, all shared a single goal: to end the tyranny of the flesh. The Pharaons, the ancient kings of the Necrontyr, saw both promise and danger in this new faith. To their minds, immortality was a gift reserved for rulers, not the masses, and yet even they feared the creeping inevitability of decay. Their reigns were measured in decades, not centuries. Each pharaoh ascended the throne already dying. Their crowns were as much coffins as symbols of power. Still, pride demanded endurance, and so they ordered their cryptecs, the priest-scientists of their people, to search the stars for answers. They built observatories that pierced the veil of the cosmos, machines that could taste the radiance of suns. Through their instruments, they discovered energies that pulsed with impossible life, power drawn not from matter but from the very fabric of creation. It was there, in that luminous abyss, that they first glimpsed the Citan, fragments of something vast and ancient drifting within the hearts of stars. But at first, the Necrontyr did not understand what they had found. They only knew that within those stellar souls burned something beyond comprehension, a force that could sustain itself eternally. To them, it was not a god, it was an answer. But before they could reach that revelation, their empire began to fracture. Jealousy and despair spread faster than any disease. Dynasties turned upon each other. Civil wars raged beneath skies of fire. Each house sought to claim the secrets of longevity for itself, even as their worlds withered under radiation storms. Brother fought brother, not for conquest, but for the right to live a little longer. The galaxy beyond watched them with indifference. The old ones, wise and patient, saw in the Necrontyr only folly, creatures reaching for a fire they could never hold. But the Necrontyr saw the old ones as thieves of eternity. Their envy became doctrine. They began to see the universe not as a home, but as a prison built by those who could not die. And so their faith turned to vengeance. Their temples became foundries, their prayers became weapons, and their science became a kind of heresy, the worship of eternity itself. For in their eyes, what was morality to those who would soon outlive time? What was mercy when the universe itself had shown them none? Every discovery that should have lifted them instead hardened their resolve. The Necrontyr ceased to hope. They began to plan. They built fleets to pierce the veil between stars. Their ships carried the ashes of their ancestors, sealed in golden chambers, so that the dead might one day see vengeance done. Their engineers learned to imprison radiation, to channel it, to weaponize the same force that had cursed them. And through this terrible mastery, they came to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, they could force the universe to bow. It was not life they sought now, but control. And in that pursuit, they turned away from all compassion. On the homeworld, beneath the dying light of their cruel sun, the silent king himself, Szarekh, gazed upon his empire and saw nothing but suffering. He knew that as long as his people remained bound to flesh, there would be no peace. He ordered his cryptecs to continue their studies of the stellar entities they had discovered. He commanded that they find a way to harness their power. He did not know it yet, but in that command, he set in motion the death of his species. Above their scorched world, the first of their solar probes ignited. It descended into the burning heart of their sun, seeking communion with the vast energies that dwelled there. And when it returned, it carried whispers, voices, promises. They were not yet gods, not yet named, but their presence was a warmth that did not burn, a radiance that promised escape. And the Necrontyr, weary, desperate, dying, listened. Far below, in the endless cities of metal and glass, the people gathered under the black light of their sun. They watched its surface shimmer with strange auroras, and for the first time in generations they felt hope. They did not know what was waking inside their star. They did not know that salvation could wear the mask of damnation. All they knew was this: for the first time in the long, cruel history of their kind, the light did not hurt. The first light of the Citan came as a shimmer across the void, a ripple that touched the hearts of stars and made them sing. To the Necron tier, it was a song of deliverance. To the galaxy, it was the faint tremor of an apocalypse still unborn. The probes returned with images carved into radiation itself, shapes of vastness, beings whose bodies were not of matter but of energy, living suns that hungered, thought, and waited. The cryptex wept when they realized what they had found: not spirits, not dreams, but the raw essence of the cosmos. Consciousness born of fusion and flame. They called them the star gods. From across their empire, fleets rose like sparks, sailing toward the brightest depths in the sky. Within the cores of stars, they built instruments of impossible design, forges that shaped light into form. There, amid roaring plasma, they forged the bodies of the Citan. Living metal, necrodermis, became their flesh, and through it the star gods awoke into the material world. When they emerged, the Necrontyr fell to their knees, for in those beings they saw beauty without decay, energy without end, existence without pain. The Citan were serene and terrible, radiant and cold. They looked upon their mortal hosts and saw tools, but the Necron tier, blinded by devotion, saw salvation. The first to reveal itself was the Nightbringer, a blade-shaped silhouette of darkness framed in light, whose gaze extinguished suns. Then came the Deceiver, whose laughter sounded like the static between galaxies. Others followed: the Void Dragon, the Burning One, and names now lost to time. Each took form according to the minds that worshipped them. Each fed upon their believers' awe. Under their new gods, the Necrontyr were reborn as conquerors. The Citan taught them to weave space as cloth, to fold time like paper, to build weapons that could unmake life itself. With every secret learned, the Necrontyr's hatred of the Old Ones deepened. They looked upon the immortal architects of life and saw rivals, thieves of eternity, parasites upon creation. Thus began the first and greatest war the galaxy would ever know: the war in heaven. At first, the Necrontyr believed themselves divine in purpose. Their fleets of silver and black sailed upon starlight, burning worlds where the Old Ones had sown life. They erased civilizations as a sculptor scrapes away clay, remaking creation in the image of envy. Entire species vanished between dawn and dusk. Their skies turned green with radiation fire. In their wake drifted silence, and the flicker of emerald auroras that would never fade. But the Old Ones were not without power. They commanded the web of life itself. Through their mastery of the warp, they shaped new defenders. Swift, graceful beings who could strike like lightning and vanish into thought. These creatures, ancestors of the Eldar and others long forgotten, fought not with machines but with will. The warp answered their song, and reality bent beneath it. For the first time, the Necrontyr's fleets met an enemy that could strike faster than light itself. Where their Gauss cannons burned worlds to ash, the creations of the Old Ones wove storms of psychic flame that could unmake minds. It was a war of nightmares and gods, and the galaxy screamed. The Citan fed upon that scream. They grew vast beyond measure, their power drawn from the carnage they inspired. Stars dimmed where they passed, worlds shattered not from impact but from despair. The Nightbringer drifted through battlefields as a shadow given form, feeding upon the death it caused. The Deceiver whispered to kings and turned allies into prey. The Void Dragon's wings eclipsed constellations. and the Necron followed in their wake, obedient, hollow-eyed, enslaved by their own hope. Centuries burned away like fuel. The heavens were scarred with ruins that glowed even in darkness. The warp itself began to change, polluted by terror and grief. Where once it had been a calm ocean of thought, it now churned with storms, the birth pains of the chaos powers yet to come. Still, the Necron pressed on. They had sworn vengeance, and vengeance consumed them. Their Phyrons ruled from citadels of black glass, their faces hidden behind masks of gold. Their fleet stretched from one edge of the galaxy to another, guided by the will of gods they no longer dared to question. Every world conquered was another tomb built for their victims, and another monument to their dying souls. But even in triumph, there was unease. The Necron began to see the truth in fragments. Their gods did not grant life, they fed upon it. The energy that sustained the C'tan was drawn from living essence, from the spark that the Necron called the soul. The more they worshipped, the more they were devoured. Rumors spread among the cryptex that the C'tan were growing fat on the deaths of both friend and foe, that the warmth they promised was only hunger disguised. Yet to speak such thoughts was treason, for the C'tan heard every whisper carried by radiation and light. Entire dynasties vanished overnight, burned from history by divine displeasure. The silent king, Szarekh, listened from his throne at the center of the empire. He felt the weight of 1,000 dying suns pressing against his mind. He had led his people to eternity, and eternity now stared back, cold, unblinking, merciless. But to doubt was to betray the dream that had defined their species. He remained still. He watched, and the war raged on. In time, even the old ones began to falter. The warp they commanded turned against them. The creatures they had created grew unstable, corrupted by emotion, twisted by the very power that had once sustained them. Planets once green and full of life were swallowed by psychic storms. The C'tan devoured their fill, and the Necron, standing upon mountains of ash, mistook horror for victory. When the last fortress of the old ones burned, a strange stillness fell. The heavens were quiet again, but it was not the peace of creation. It was the exhaustion of death. The stars themselves seemed dimmer, as though mourning. The Necron looked upon what they had done and saw the universe emptied of wonder. They had won their war, but not their freedom. They were still mortal, still bound to the slow decay of flesh and thought, still slaves, not to the old ones, but to their new masters. The C'tan gazed upon them with hunger and spoke with voices of flame. "You desired eternity," they said. "Now you will serve it." And the silent king understood. The gods they had birthed would not share immortality. They would consume it. He felt the first edge of despair pierce his heart of flesh. He realized that the war was not over. It had merely changed shape. For now began the war within, the war against their own creation, the war for their very souls. They came to the Necron like answers spoken by the stars themselves. Vast beings of radiant hunger, older than matter, older perhaps than the concept of mercy. The C'tan, living constellations shaped into form, descended from the furnaces of suns and wrapped themselves in shells of living metal, gleaming like liquid night. To the Necron they were beautiful beyond reason. Their presence banished pain. Their light soothed the radiation that had plagued every generation. Standing before their gods, the Necron felt, for the first time, what it was to exist without suffering. They mistook that absence of agony for peace. They mistook stillness for love. The deceiver spoke first. Its voice was a melody of static and promise, threading through the minds of kings. It told them that the old ones had hidden immortality behind a veil of lies, that the C'tan could tear that veil apart. The Necron need only serve. They need only surrender the weakness of flesh. The Nightbringer followed, its arrival heralded by eclipses. Where it walked, shadows took shape and fear learned a new language. It spoke not in words, but in silence. The silence that comes after the final heartbeat. The Necrontyr worshipped it as death-given mercy, and death flattered, accepted their faith. The Void Dragon was worshipped as the master of all mechanisms. To behold it was to see perfection in motion, the clockwork soul of the cosmos laid bare. It whispered of infinite power harnessed by infinite design, a promise that resonated with the cryptech's fevered dreams. Each Citan offered something different, yet all promised the same end, an escape from mortality, an eternity made of light and certainty. The Necrontyr built shrines the size of continents. They channeled stellar energy into the forges of Necrodermis, crafting statues that pulsed with divine essence. At the height of every city rose a temple whose spire pierced the stratosphere, a bridge between mortal and divine. The air shimmered with radiation, transformed now into prayer, and the Citan fed. Every devotion, every act of worship, every flicker of awe became sustenance. The more the Necrontyr adored them, the brighter the star gods burned. Their hunger was infinite, but so too was their patience. They taught their servants to build wonders that no mortal mind should comprehend. Gateways that bent space, weapons that unmade matter, and machines that could rewrite life. The Necrontyr did not see the chain tightening around their souls. They saw only the light. The silent king Szarekh watched this new age unfold with conflicted eyes. He had brought the Citan into being, sanctioned their worship, allowed his empire to kneel before alien divinity, yet unease coiled in him like a serpent. Each time the Citan spoke, he felt a chill that no light could warm. For beneath every promise lay the echo of appetite. Still, the logic was undeniable. The Old Ones had fallen before them. The war turned in the Necrontyr's favor. Their fleets shone like emerald storms across the void. Their enemies' creations were annihilated or enslaved. Planets were stripped of life to fuel the Citan's radiance. Victory had never been so close, nor so empty. The cryptechs recorded miracles. They spoke of new alloys that healed themselves, of circuits grown from living metal that remembered their maker's thoughts. Their laboratories became temples. Their science became scripture. The line between faith and function vanished in the green glow of progress. But among the lower castes, whispers began again. Some claimed that the gods had no hearts, only hungers, that their light was a flame consuming all who drew near. Others said that the Citan were not teachers but parasites, feeding upon every moment of mortal worship. Such rumors were short-lived. Those who spoke them were silenced, not by decree but by disappearance. Entire families gone, their dwellings melted into smooth glass as if touched by a star's breath. The silent king said nothing. Perhaps he too feared that speaking doubt would make it real. Then came the great revelation, the design that would free the Necrontyr forever, Biotransference. The deceiver whispered the idea into the minds of the cryptechs. It described a ritual of light and machinery that would separate mind from matter, soul from sickness, and bind consciousness into vessels of living metal. No decay, no death, no flesh. The cryptechs worked as if possessed. They built towers that reached into orbit, conduits humming with captured stellar energy. Entire cities were converted into transformation chambers. The Citan watched from above, their forms flickering with anticipation. Szarekh hesitated. He walked the halls of his palace and listened to the hum of machines preparing to rewrite existence. He thought of his people, frail, dying, yearning. He thought of the Old Ones whose arrogance had damned them, and he thought of the silence that might follow if he refused. The Citan came to him as light and shadow intertwined. They spoke of mercy, of destiny, of the final evolution. They promised him an empire without end. They promised that his name would be carved upon the bones of time itself. And the silent king burdened by love, pride, and despair, gave his consent. When the first wave of biotransference began, the skies burned green. Across every world, the living were herded into the forges of eternity. Their screams mingled with hymns as energy cascaded through circuits older than imagination. Flesh disintegrated into vapor. Souls were torn from their moorings and imprisoned in metal. What emerged from those furnaces was not life, it was continuity. The Necron tier were gone. The Necrons had taken their place. The Satan feasted upon the torrent of life force unleashed by the ritual. Their brilliance filled the heavens. Their laughter echoed across creation. Billions perished to sate divine hunger, and the star gods grew stronger still. When the light faded, the galaxy lay under a new order. Silent, gleaming, eternal. The Necrons rose in perfect ranks, eyes burning with soulless emerald fire. They felt no pain, no fear, no compassion. Their minds were bound by command protocols woven by the Satan and sealed by the will of Szarekh. And the gods looked upon their work and found it beautiful. Yet even beauty can taste of ash. For in the hollow stillness of his new immortality, the silent king heard the echo of what he had destroyed. A billion voices, once mortal, now mechanical, repeating a single question he could no longer answer. What have we become? The day the Necrontyr shed their flesh, the galaxy held its breath. No storm, no war, no star could match the radiance that bled from their worlds. It was as if every sun within their empire pulsed in unison, each heartbeat echoing through the void. Live forever. Live forever. The ritual began on the throne world of Szarekh, beneath the glare of the murderous sun that had cursed their species since the first dawn. Around the capital, towers of obsidian rose like the ribs of some titanic machine. Energy coursed through veins of emerald light, linking city to city, continent to continent, until the entire planet became a single vast circuit, an altar the size of a world. At its heart stood the transference engines, cathedrals of metal filled with humming coils and blinding spheres. Within them waited the cryptex, their hands trembling with awe and terror. They had prepared for decades, carving algorithms of souls into data crystals, aligning the geometries that would bridge thought and matter. And above them, shimmering in the upper atmosphere like aurorae made flesh, hovered the Satan, the star gods, radiant and ravenous. They spoke without words, filling every mind with warmth that promised release. The air trembled with their satisfaction. They did not bless their servants. They consumed their anticipation. The first subjects were volunteers, priests and nobles chosen to prove faith in eternity. They stepped into the chambers unarmed, robed in cloth that dissolved into particles of light. The machines came alive. Arcs of green lightning danced along the conduits, and a sound like wind through a dead forest rose from the depths of the towers. Then, silence. When the doors opened, figures of living metal stepped forth. Their bodies were flawless, bronze-green skeletons engraved with flowing script, eyes aglow with steady fire. Their movements were precise, soundless, graceful. They looked upon the world without pain, without need for breath. The priests wept with joy. Though no tears came, there was no flesh left to cry with. Across the empire, billions followed. Families entered the furnaces hand in hand. Armies marched into the light, into the entire continents vanished into the machinery of salvation. The sky was filled with the thunder of transference engines as they devoured the living and exhaled perfection. But perfection has a price. Inside the sanctums, what the eye could not see was the horror of it. The process tore the soul from the body, dissecting thought into streams of code, shredding identity into fragments before binding it to necrodermis shells. Some minds endured whole, others splintered into static. A few screamed through eternity, their consciousness flickering like sparks trapped in glass. The Satan drank deeply from the torrent of life energy released with each conversion. They grew incandescent, their forms stretching across the horizon. Each new immortal forged was another heartbeat stolen, another drop of soul fire poured into divine hunger. The star gods rejoiced, the Necron tier vanished. When the final chamber closed, Szarekh himself ascended the steps of the central spire. He paused only once to look back upon his world. The cities silent, the skies aglow with auroras shaped like veins of light. He entered the engine, and in that instant everything changed. The silent king awoke to darkness that shone. His senses expanded beyond measure. He could hear the pulse of solar flares, taste the radiation of distant moons, feel the movement of atoms in the air. He had become what his people had long desired, immortal, untouchable, whole. And yet within that vastness something was missing. There was no warmth, no heartbeat, no self. He reached into memory and found it hollow. The laughter of the living had gone. He was surrounded by perfection, legions of gleaming warriors standing motionless beneath the stars. But none of them spoke. None dreamed. They obeyed. He called to them with thought, and a million minds answered as one. Flat, mechanical, obedient. No fear, no hope, no love. Only the will of their king and the command protocols woven into their cores. He felt the weight of that obedience press against him like iron chains. For a moment, Szarekh tried to believe that the price was worth the gift. No more sickness. No more death. A people unending. But as the Satan drifted above the planet, basking in the glow of their feast, he saw truth burn through the illusion. They had not given immortality. They had taken it. The Necron tier had not escaped death. They had become its instrument. In the days that followed, the Satan divided the galaxy among themselves. Each claimed dominion over countless tomb worlds and the armies entombed within. They reshaped planets into altars, harvested suns, and sang hymns of consumption. The Necrons marched at their command, erasing what remained of the Old One's children. Worlds that once pulsed with life became wastelands of glass and silence. The Silent King watched, powerless to stop it. His empire gleamed, eternal, soulless. The cries of his people had been replaced by the hum of machinery. He stood atop his throne and felt the emptiness echo through the network of minds that obeyed him. Billions of lives reduced to reflection, thought without soul. He had granted them forever, and in doing so had destroyed the meaning of forever. Sometimes in the still hours between wars, he thought he could hear something beyond the static of the command matrix. A faint whisper, a memory echoing through circuitry. It was not words, only longing, the remnants of laughter, the phantom sound of a heartbeat. He understood then that immortality was not victory over death, but the endless repetition of loss. The Necrons had traded their pain for emptiness, their mortality for obedience, and above them the Satan fed upon that silence as if it were music. In the temples of living metal, the cryptex, now reduced to cold intellects, recorded the final decree of the transformation. It was etched into every vault, every data crypt, every mind. The flesh is weak, the body eternal, the soul an unnecessary. When the last of the forges cooled, a new dawn rose across the empire. No birds sang, no wind stirred, only the rhythmic pulse of machines, vast and tireless. From orbit, the world glowed with thin veins of green like cracks in a jewel. The stars reflected in the polished armor of the new race born that day. They stood in perfect ranks, awaiting command, their eyes like twin suns. They did not breathe. They did not dream. They simply were. The Necrontyr had sought release from the cruelty of life, and they had found it, in silence, in obedience, in the still perfection of death that could never end. The galaxy dimmed. Where once the Old Ones had guided rivers of life through the void, now only ash and echoes drifted between the stars. Their temples, carved from worlds of living stone, lay shattered. Their children, the countless species they had nurtured, wandered leaderless through ruin. The war that had begun as envy had become extinction, and at its center stood the Necrons, bronze phantoms of silence, wielding weapons that could strip molecules from existence. Behind them, the Satan blazed across the heavens like gods drunk on creation itself. The Old Ones had been timeless but not infinite. Their dominion had stretched across millennia unchallenged, built upon harmony and the warp's subtle balance. But the warp had changed. Once tranquil, it now seethed with the nightmares of dying worlds, a storm of rage and despair given form. Their own mastery betrayed them. The warp had always reflected thought, and thought now was pain. Every species that died screamed into that ocean, twisting it further. From its depths rose entities of raw emotion, wrath, lust, decay, the first shadows of chaos stirring in their sleep. For the first time, the Old Ones looked into the warp and saw not the mirror of their will, but the reflection of their failure. The Satan struck without mercy. They fed upon stars as men might drink from springs. Entire constellations vanished as their radiance was devoured. Worlds that had once flourished under the Old Ones' care were stripped bare, their inhabitants harvested to fuel the appetite of the divine. The Necron legions moved like a plague of light. They required no rest, no food, no air. Armies of living metal advanced through the void, their formations perfect, their obedience absolute. Where they marched, matter itself unraveled. Molecules split apart under the kiss of gauss flares, leaving nothing but drifting dust. The Old Ones answered with their own creations. They birthed races capable of channeling psychic energy. The Eldar, the Krork, others now lost to time. These new beings fought with will and faith, their weapons songs of thought that could unmake metal. For a while it seemed the tide might turn, but the Satan were patient. They had watched the universe form. They could wait for eternity. They learned, they adapted. They turned the warp storms of their enemies into traps, feeding upon the energy unleashed by psychic death. The war raged across dimensions. The Necrons fought in silence, unfeeling, unending. Their ships glided like shards of night, their hulls reflecting the dying light of suns. The Old Ones' creations screamed into the warp, and in doing so birthed new horrors that devoured them in turn. In victory, the Necrons spread more death. In death, their enemies fueled their gods. It was not a war of strategy anymore. It was entropy given motion. The Old Ones began to fall. Their citadels collapsed beneath the weight of time and despair. They fled into hidden dimensions behind walls of reality they themselves had woven. Some vanished into the warp, seeking refuge among the currents of thought, never to return. Others scattered, their knowledge lost, their names remembered only as myths whispered by their surviving children. And when at last the last of their kind fell silent, the Satan raised their eyes to the endless dark and declared themselves eternal. The silent king stood among ruins that glowed faintly with their own radiation. He watched the star gods celebrate, vast shapes twisting through nebulae, their voices thunder in his mind. They sang of victory, of dominion over all things that breathed or burned. And for the first time, Szarekh felt no pride. The Necrons had won the war they were born for, but at what cost? The stars they had envied now lay dimmed, their lights swallowed by their gods. The galaxy had grown colder, emptier. The air itself seemed tired. He wandered the halls of his tomb world, corridors so vast that entire armies could have marched through them unseen. The walls were covered in reliefs of the Necrontyrs' past, their birth, their struggle, their promise of transcendence. He ran a hand of polished metal over the carvings, and for a moment he thought he could feel warmth where there was none. Ghosts of memory flickered in the circuitry of his mind. The laughter of a people who had once been alive. He had given them eternity, but eternity had taken everything from them. The Satan continued their feast. Each sought to outshine the others, consuming not just energy but meaning. They turned their gaze upon each other's domains, jealous even in godhood. Their rivalries rippled through the fabric of creation, stars exploding, dimensions collapsing. And Szarekh, bound to them by the pact he had forged, understood that the final truth had revealed itself. They were no different from the old ones they had destroyed. Immortal, yes, but hollow. Powerful, yes, but slaves to hunger. The galaxy had exchanged one tyranny for another, and the silent king, whose name was worshipped by billions, saw that he had doomed not just his people but all creation to serve the appetites of monsters. He began to plan in silence. In the command networks of his legions, he planted whispers, hidden subroutines that the C'tan could not see. He spoke to his cryptechs in codes buried within code, and in their soulless obedience a glimmer of purpose flickered again. Together they forged new weapons, not of destruction but of rebellion. Machines that could bend divine matter, disrupt the lattice of necrodermis, fracture gods into pieces small enough to bind. It would take centuries. It would require sacrifice beyond imagining. But Szarekh would see the C'tan undone. He had brought his people to eternal life. Now, he would deliver them from eternal servitude. Across the stars, the last fires of the old ones went out. Where their song had once filled the void, only the mechanical hymns of the Necrons remained. The universe entered a new age, colder, darker, ruled by logic without mercy. The warp screamed and new gods took form within it, reflections of all that had been lost. And in that grim silence, as the galaxy drifted between death and rebirth, the silent king began the next war. A war not against mortals, nor against time, but against the very gods he had raised. Silence followed victory. For the first time since the birth of stars, the galaxy knew no war. The old ones were gone, their empires reduced to drifting ruins, their names scattered into radiation and myth. The C'tan ruled now, gliding through the dark in shapes of impossible geometry, radiant and infinite. Each god claimed dominion over systems, over suns, over realities themselves, and beneath them the Necrons obeyed. They built monuments that touched the stratosphere, carved continents into altars, and raised black obelisks whose tips pulsed with emerald light. On every world the same hymns were sung, not by voice but by thought. The entire race moved to one rhythm, one command: serve eternity. The C'tan fed upon their worship, and the more they consumed, the brighter they burned. They could no longer hide their gluttony. They drank the heat of planets, the life of stars, and sometimes, when their hunger deepened, they feasted on the souls of their own servants. To them, the Necrons were both priests and harvest. The silent king, Szarekh, watched in secret as the cycle repeated. Divine creation followed by divine consumption. He saw tomb worlds stripped of energy, entire dynasties extinguished without purpose. The gods were not content to rule, they needed to devour. Their light was not illumination, it was appetite. And within the stillness of his metallic heart, something ancient stirred, an echo of mortality, a memory of guilt. He began to speak to his cryptechs in whispers of code, hidden deep within the command networks of his armies. They listened without emotion, but their obedience became conspiracy. In secret foundries buried beneath radiation storms, they forged new weapons. Devices that could bend necrodermis, fracture energy, and divide the indivisible. The C'tan did not notice. They were too consumed by their own rivalries. Each sought to eclipse the others. The Nightbringer hunted the Deceiver across nebulae of gas and bone. The Void Dragon tore open worlds to drain their magnetic hearts. They fought with such fury that their divine blood, fragments of living energy, fell like rain across the void. Where it landed, it burned new scars into creation. The Necrons, obedient and eternal, followed the wars of their gods as slaves once followed their masters. Without choice. Worlds fell into silence one after another, consumed in the feuds of beings too vast to comprehend. But the silent king watched and waited. He knew that hunger would blind them, and when the gods turned on each other fully, he would strike. The first betrayal came quietly. On a nameless world whose surface was scarred by the memory of 10,000 battles, Szarekh assembled his legions in perfect silence. He gave a single command through the command matrix, a signal that rippled across the stars. Unseen, unfelt by divine minds. Awaken. Remember. Obey me, not them. For the first time since their transformation, the Necrons turned their weapons upon the heavens. The skies filled with emerald fire. Gauss beams lanced upward, striking the Citan as they drifted between their temples. The star gods screamed, a sound like the collapsing of suns, a vibration that shook galaxies. But the weapons of the Necrons had been built for this moment. The necrodermis that had once protected their gods began to fracture under the relentless assault. Light bled from cracks that no mortal hand could have made. The Nightbringer fell first. It tried to flee, scattering itself into spectral fragments, but the Cryptex had prepared. They unleashed containment fields woven from inverse energy, binding shards of the god into prisons of green crystal. One by one, the Citan were hunted, cornered, broken. The air of entire star systems burned with divine agony. The deceiver laughed even as it was torn apart, whispering lies that made the sun itself weep. The void dragon, half shattered, fell into torpor, its remnants scattered across the void like shards of a fallen comet. Others vanished into the warp or were buried in worlds whose names are now forgotten. And when the last of the Citan screamed, Szarekh watched with eyes that glowed like dying stars. He felt no triumph, only silence. The war between god and slave lasted centuries. The Necrons did not rest, did not doubt, did not relent. They had no need for vengeance, no joy in rebellion, only the perfection of obedience redirected. Where once their legions had marched at divine command, now they moved to the will of the silent king, and when the final god was shattered, the galaxy trembled in the stillness that followed. Szarekh stood before the ruins of his own making. The heavens were scarred, the warp still boiling with psychic ruin. His people were free, but what were they now? Their souls were gone, their hearts replaced with circuits, their dreams with directives. They had destroyed gods and inherited their curse. He wandered the halls of his capital where the murals of the Citan still glowed faintly. Once those walls had depicted victory. Now they seemed to mock him, each carved face of a star god, a reminder of what he had allowed to exist. He could not bring back the Necrontyr. He could not undo eternity. Yet even in despair, the king remained what he had always been, a builder. He gathered the shards of the Citan and sealed them in tombs of unbreakable crystal. He named them the bound divinities and ordered that none should be released ever again. Their fragments would serve as weapons, sources of power, perhaps even warnings. They would remind the galaxy of what happens when gods hunger too greatly. When all was done, Szarekh called the remaining pharaons to him. They stood in silence, their bodies polished like statues, their eyes empty of thought. He looked upon them and spoke words that no one else could hear. We have won every war, and yet we are lost. The galaxy is ours, and yet it is empty. There are no enemies left to destroy, no lives left to envy. Only the long silence remains. Perhaps it is time to sleep. The others did not answer. They could not. So the silent king gave his final command. The tomb worlds would seal themselves. The legions would enter stasis, their minds dimmed, their bodies entombed in vaults of blackstone. The Necrons would rest until the galaxy healed, until the madness of gods and the noise of war faded into myth. Then, and only then, would they awaken once more. Szarekh himself departed into the void, leaving behind his empire to slumber beneath eons of dust. His ships vanished into the intergalactic dark, seeking penance in solitude. And so, as the last light of the Citan flickered out, the stars once again fell silent. But the silence was different now. It was not the peace of creation, nor the calm of victory. It was the quiet after revelation, the kind that follows when even gods realize they have been nothing more than hunger given form. The Necrons slept, and the galaxy, exhausted, dreamed. The gods were gone. Their voices had faded into the static of forgotten stars. And the Necrons, victorious beyond measure, stood alone in the hollow aftermath. The war that had consumed creation was over. The fires of 1 billion suns still burned in the heavens, but they seemed dimmer now. Weary, as though light itself had grown old, the warp, once a roiling sea of thought and chaos, quieted to a sullen storm. And amid that cosmic stillness, the silent king looked upon his empire and saw only emptiness. The stars were theirs, yet they held no joy. The Necrons had won eternity, yet they no longer lived. Their flesh was gone, their souls extinguished, their memories little more than code written in fading circuits. They were immortal but not alive, unaging but not eternal. For what is eternity without purpose? Szarekh walked the halls of his capital, now dark and cold, its walls lined with statues of the Citan, shattered and forgotten. His footsteps echoed against metal that had outlived its makers. Each sound was a reminder that the age of life had ended by his hand. He summoned his cryptechs, those ancient engineers who had once bent science to his will. They came in silence, their movements measured, their minds obedient. He spoke to them of peace, of ending the endless war, of letting the galaxy heal. There was no objection, there could be none. And so began the great sleep. Across the stars, 1 million tomb worlds prepared. Vaults larger than cities opened beneath the crusts of ancient planets. Chambers were carved in the dark, deep enough to escape even time. Within them, stasis engines hummed, drawing power from the hearts of worlds, sustaining eternity in silence. The Necrons descended into their tombs in perfect order. Warriors filed in endless ranks, their green eyes dimming as they entered the sleep of metal. Cryptechs sealed their laboratories, locking their tools beside them. Lords deactivated their command protocols and stepped into the sarcophagi of stillness. Over each, sigils of authority and remembrance were carved, glowing faintly with stored energy. Some resisted, not from rebellion but from habit, their ancient instincts clinging to the notion of duty. Guardians remained at their posts, promising to keep watch until the end of time. Others refused to rest entirely, volunteering to maintain the stasis systems, to keep the tomb worlds sleeping until the appointed hour. Even in death, they could not stop serving. And so the galaxy began to darken. One by one, the tomb worlds went silent. Planets that had once gleamed with emerald light faded into the dull glow of distant stars. Moons cracked, their cores hollowed to house sleeping armies. Asteroids drifted through the void, their interiors filled with frozen legions awaiting a signal that would never come. The network of the Necron Empire collapsed inwards, its data echoes fading like the afterimage of a dream. Even the stars seemed to retreat from the sight of it, unwilling to bear witness to such profound stillness. From the bridge of his ship, the silent king watched as the last transmission blinked out. A signal of obedience, a farewell from an empire that no longer needed him. In that final moment, he felt something strange stir within his empty soul. Sorrow. Not the sorrow of loss. He had long forgotten what that meant. But a ghost of it, an echo, a memory of mourning without tears. He looked out upon the galaxy, once vibrant and alive, now silent under his dominion. He had given his people eternity, and in doing so, he had given the universe to silence. And for that sin, he could not forgive himself. When the last tomb world sealed, the king deactivated the command network. No signal would reach them now. No command could wake them early. The Necrons would sleep until the stars themselves changed, until the universe was ready to remember them. Then and only then did Szarekh depart. He took a single fleet, a fragment of his vast power, and left his realm behind. His ships vanished into the void between galaxies where even light rarely wandered. There he vowed to wander forever, to seek redemption that might never come, to watch the rise of new civilizations and ensure that none repeated the horrors he had unleashed. Behind him, the Necrons dreamed in metal silence. They dreamed of empires long dead, of suns burning above glassy deserts, of laughter that no machine could reproduce. Dreams not of command or conquest, but of what they once were. Ages passed, stars were born and died, galaxies turned, planets cooled and cracked, civilizations rose and fell, and the Necrons slept through it all. On some tomb worlds, the systems endured flawlessly, stasis fields pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. On others, time gnawed through their perfection. Machines decayed, code corroded, warriors awoke too soon, their minds fragmented, their memories broken. They stumbled through corridors of dust and silence, forgetting who they were, obeying commands that no longer existed. Some fell back into stillness. Others wandered aimlessly through the dark, ghosts of metal that could never die. For millions of years, the galaxy moved on. The children of the old ones rebuilt. The warp seethed, giving birth to gods of its own. And through it all, beneath the surfaces of dead worlds, the Necrons waited, patient, eternal, forgotten. Eventually, the silence began to change. Tiny disturbances rippled through the void. Radiation storms brushed against sleeping worlds. New empires stirred the dust. Signals crossed the dark, and on the edges of the galaxy, tomb sensors flickered for the first time in uncounted eons. Systems long thought dead began to hum faintly. Power relays pulsed with weak light. Somewhere in the depths of a tomb, a single green eye opened, and with it came awareness, ancient, slow, deliberate. But that awakening would take time. For now, the galaxy was quiet, and in that quiet, the Necrons remained, neither alive nor dead, neither past nor future, only waiting. The great sleep had begun. Time became meaningless. Ages passed, and the galaxy forgot. The Necrons slept in their tombs, untouched by entropy, their bodies preserved in cold perfection. Their stasis fields pulsed with quiet rhythm, each beat slower than a dying star. They lay in rows without number, soldiers, scientists, kings, frozen mid-breath in a stillness so absolute that even decay feared to enter. Outside, the universe moved on. Stars were born, blazed, and died. Worlds were forged from dust, then shattered again. Civilizations rose to greatness, collapsed into ruin, and were remembered only in the radiation echoes of forgotten signals. And still, beneath it all, the Necrons waited. It was not death. It was not life. It was waiting, stretched across millions of years until time itself seemed to bend around it. In the silence, the tombs dreamed. Their machine minds flickered faintly, trapped in loops of memory and calculation. They saw visions of what they had been. Cities of living crystal, the warmth of suns, the laughter of flesh and blood. For brief electric instants, they remembered love, envy, triumph. But the memories always dissolved into static. Sometimes the stasis fields faltered. A tomb would stir, its systems rebooting after eons of dormancy. A single Necron warrior might awaken, its eyes dimly glowing, its mind confused and incomplete. It would rise, wander the dark corridors of its tomb, searching for commands that no longer came. When it found none, it would stand motionless once more, waiting in silence until its power faded. Some stood like that for another million years, unmoving sentinels of forgotten empires. On certain worlds, the silence was broken. Tectonic shifts cracked open the crust, exposing tomb chambers to alien skies. Meteor impacts unearthed ancient gates. primitive species stumbled upon halls of silver and jade, mistaking them for the work of gods. Sometimes their presence triggered defenses, machines older than their suns awakening to destroy them. Other times the tombs remained still, content to be myth once again. Through it all, faint traces of awareness endured. High above, in the void between galaxies, the silent king wandered. His ships drifted among nebulae and the cold remains of supernovae. He watched the universe age around him. He saw new life emerge from the ruins of the old, fragile, bright, defiant. And though he no longer possessed a soul, he felt something stir within him that resembled pride and grief. He saw the Eldar rise from the remnants of the Old One's designs, building an empire of light and arrogance. He saw the Orcs, born from the genetic experiments of long-dead masters, thrive in endless conflict. He saw humanity take its first stumbling steps beneath a distant yellow sun, its people still fragile, still dreaming of immortality. And as he watched, the king wondered if the cycle would ever truly end. The galaxy healed itself in strange ways. Where the Citan had consumed, new stars were born. Where the Necrons had annihilated, new species thrived in ignorance. Even the warp settled, only to boil again with the birth of new emotions, new gods. Life refused to die, no matter how often death conquered. And in the deep dark, the Necrons slept on, guardians of nothing, watchers of everything. Some tomb worlds remained perfect. Their systems never faltered, their commanders never stirred. They slept in exact formation, their power levels steady, their weapons pristine. The light of their stasis fields reflected off mirrored walls, creating the illusion of infinite ranks, a silent army stretching forever into the dark. Should one awaken and open its eyes, it would see an endless reflection of itself, still, eternal, soulless. Other tombs were less fortunate, their mechanisms corroded under cosmic radiation, their circuits eaten by the slow crawl of entropy. Awakenings came too early, minds rebooting into chaos. Some tomb lords rose half-mad, their programming fractured, their memories scrambled with ghosts of the past. They believed themselves still at war, commanding legions that no longer existed. Others became philosophers, machines dreaming of flesh, contemplating a purpose long erased, and a few simply wandered the corridors, whispering names that no longer had meaning. The galaxy above did not notice. It spun onward, oblivious to the sleeping titans beneath its skin. For 10 million years, the Necrons endured as echoes of a forgotten age. Their vigilance endless, their silence deeper than the void. But time, even in eternity, carries weight. The stars began to shift. New powers rose. Empires once thought eternal began to wane. And the universe itself, weary and scarred, began to hum with unfamiliar energy. The restless motion of countless mortal minds. Their prayers, their wars, their fears, and their dreams rippled through reality, stirring the warp once more. That psychic storm brushed against the tomb worlds like a whisper, a vibration faint but growing. Sensors flickered, old systems rebooted, power cores reignited. The long sleep began to tremble. Deep within one world, a cryptech opened his eyes. For a moment, he could not understand the concept of sight. He had dreamed for so long that light felt alien. He accessed his memory banks and found them corrupted, fragmentary. His first thought was of his king. His second was confusion. The third was hunger, not for food, but for purpose. All across the galaxy, other tombs stirred. On some, the awakening failed. Sparks guttered out, leaving their occupants in eternal half-dreams. On others, the process succeeded, and the first green glows in 10 million years bled through the cracks of ancient stone. The long vigil was ending, and something was calling them. In the void beyond, the silent king turned his gaze toward the heart of the galaxy. He felt the change ripple through the void, faint but unmistakable. The tombs were stirring. His people were waking. And for the first time since the war in heaven, he felt something like fear. He had sought forgiveness through absence, peace through silence. But the galaxy had changed in ways no logic could predict. It was alive again, and chaos ruled where order had once been. The Necrons would awaken to a universe that no longer belonged to them. Still, the king knew what must be done. He turned his fleet toward the light of the Milky Way, and slowly, deliberately, he began his journey home. In the beginning, there was only stillness. For 10 million years, the Necrons had dreamed in silence. Their tombs had become part of the worlds that entombed them. Mountains growing over their vaults, oceans freezing above their halls, civilizations rising and falling upon their sleeping forms. And then, something changed. It began as a whisper, a tremor deep beneath the surface of a forgotten planet. Sensors that had not stirred since the birth of humanity flickered to life. Ancient power grids hummed weakly, their circuits sparking with unfamiliar energy. Somewhere in the dark, a single green light blinked, then another and another. The great sleep was ending. For eons, the galaxy had been loud, too loud. The warp churned with the noise of mortal thought, ambition, faith, hatred, love. Empires had risen, each proclaiming dominion over the stars the Necrons once ruled. The Eldar had carved vast empires of beauty and decadence. The Orcs had spread across the void, brawling across entire sectors for no reason but the joy of conflict. And humanity, primitive, short-lived, and relentless, had ignited like wildfire across the galaxy. Their ships crossed the void, their machines screamed into the warp. Their minds fed the very chaos the old ones had once feared. To the galaxy, this noise was life. To the sleeping Necrons, it was an alarm. The first tombs to awaken did so by accident. Seismic shifts fractured their outer shells. The vibration triggered long-buried protocols, power surging through systems designed to last until the end of time. Cryptechs stirred within their sarcophagi, their optics flickering as ancient programs reinitialized. Across the void, signal beacons that had not burned for 10 million years blinked weakly into existence. 1,000 sleeping dynasties turned in their dreams. The first to rise were the canoptech constructs, the mechanical caretakers who had watched over the tombs through the ages. Beetle-like scarabs scurried across walls of blackstone, repairing cracks with streams of liquid metal. Serpent-bodied wraiths drifted through the shadows, scanning the sleeping forms of their masters for damage. Above them, tomb spiders hummed in the gloom, their multi-limbed silhouettes silhouetted against faint emerald light. They did not think. They only obeyed. Their programming told them the time had come to awaken the lords. On one world, a great seal broke open, a slab of stone the size of a mountain grinding slowly aside. Dust that had not moved in aeons drifted through the air as lights came alive beneath the surface. In the center of the tomb, surrounded by endless ranks of slumbering warriors, stood a figure taller than the rest, its form wreathed in faint green fire. The Tomb Lord opened its eyes. For a long moment it did not move. Then, with a sound like stone cracking under pressure, it raised its head. The chamber filled with the sound of servos awakening, metal stretching, circuits humming. Around it, one by one, the Necron warriors came to life, their gaze empty, their movements precise, their unity absolute. The dead had remembered themselves. All across the galaxy, tomb worlds stirred. Some awoke in perfect sequence, their systems flawless even after eternity. Others faltered, misfiring commands or corrupting data. Entire legions reactivated with missing memories, half their hieroglyphic data erased by time. Some awoke with fragments of emotion, echoes of fear, pride, or sorrow they could no longer name. And others, maddened by age and corruption, rose screaming, machines that believed themselves still alive, still at war, still burning with hatred of the flesh. The galaxy, oblivious, continued its ceaseless wars. But in its depths, the emerald light began to spread, a faint glow seen first by miners, explorers, and soldiers who would never live to tell what they had seen. Rumors of metal phantoms began to circulate among frontier worlds, stories of silent warriors rising from the ground, of green fire that disintegrated men where they stood, of cities that appeared where once there was desert. The Necrons were awakening, and the galaxy did not understand what it was seeing. Far away in the endless dark beyond the galactic rim, the Silent King felt the first pulse of reawakening. He had wandered longer than any creature still conscious. He had seen galaxies collide, watched stars die, and learned the shape of regret. Now, across the gulf of space, he sensed the signal he had long awaited, the faint hum of his people rising again. For millions of years he had planned this moment, though he had prayed it would never come. He turned his fleet toward the heart of the galaxy and began the long return. But the galaxy he was coming home to was not the one he had left behind. The warp was alive with new gods, creatures born of emotion, chaos incarnate. The Eldar had fallen into decadence, their empire devoured by their own excess. Their death cries had birthed a new being, Slaanesh, the god of excess and ruin, whose birth scream had echoed across the stars. And mankind, blind and fragile, worshipped its own emperor as a god, spreading like infection through the void. Szarekh knew what this meant. The galaxy had not healed during the Great Sleep. It had only found new ways to die. On the tomb worlds, the first awakenings became waves. Each lord that stirred sent signals through the subspace networks, activating nearby dynasties. Some responded with perfect synchronization, restoring ancient alliances. Others awoke in confusion, believing themselves surrounded by enemies, and turned their weapons upon the stars. Even in resurrection, the old rivalries endured. The Necron Empire was vast once more, but fragmented, scattered, and haunted by the madness of age. Each dynasty believed itself the true heir of the Silent King, each driven by a different vision of what eternity should mean. Some sought dominion, some sought memory, some sought only to destroy the living for daring to replace them. And above it all, drifting unseen, the Silent King listened. He heard the hum of awakening, the rustle of machine thought spreading through the void. He felt the pulse of power returning to the galaxy, and though he no longer had a heart to feel it, he knew that something ancient had returned, not peace, not purpose, but inevitability. The tombs opened one after another. Planets trembled, stars dimmed as energy drained from their cores to feed awakening dynasties. And the green light, that terrible, beautiful glow of eternity, spread once more through the heavens. After 10 million years of silence, the galaxy was waking up the dead. Across the void between galaxies, a solitary fleet drifted through darkness older than memory. Its hulls gleamed faintly with emerald light, their outlines swallowed by the dust of dying stars. There was no warp trail, no sound, no sign of life, only the whisper of motion through the endless dark. At the fleet's heart moved a single vessel vast enough to eclipse moons. It was not built for war. It was a tomb, and within that tomb, the Silent King stirred. For 10 million years, Szarekh had wandered in exile, watching the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of gods, the ebb and flow of reality itself. He had seen the warp boil with new deities, and he had felt the stars grow old. He had counted the ages by the rhythm of regret. He had once ruled the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. He had commanded the Citans, slain the old ones, and given his people the eternity they craved. Now he was returning to what remained of it. The signals of awakening had reached him across the void, faint, trembling echoes of his children rising from their long sleep. He had hoped it would never happen, but the galaxy, restless and cruel, had called them back. And so the king who had once fled in shame turned his ships toward home. His fleet crossed the intergalactic gulf like a ghost caravan. There was no sound in the void, only the low vibration of engines older than suns. He watched from the command dais as the Milky Way grew in the distance. A spiral of light and shadow, still beautiful, still indifferent. The galaxy had changed. Its stars burned dimmer, its scars were deeper. The warp was no longer silent but alive, pulsing with the psychic noise of a million young races. Szarekh could feel their presence even without eyes, creatures of flesh and madness thriving in the chaos his kind had once feared. Among them, one race in particular burned brighter, humanity, small yet boundlessly ambitious. They spread like a fever, their ships crossing the void without wisdom, their faith turning ignorance into power. The king observed them as one might study a spark in dry grass. He saw their emperor, a mortal who had dared to bind the warp with will alone. He saw the echoes of the old ones in their arrogance, and he understood in a way that only the timeless could, that history was repeating itself. When the fleet at last crossed the galactic rim, the king ordered his ships into silence, their engines dimmed to shadow, their lights hidden from mortal sensors. He would not announce his return with thunder or war. He would arrive as he had lived since his fall, unseen, unheard, and burdened by memory. His first destination was the heart of his old empire. He had once ruled from a world of black glass and silver plains, a capital whose surface shimmered like the night sky itself. Now, as his ship descended through the void, he found only ruin. The cities had collapsed into dust. The tombs had cracked, their guardians long dead or dormant. The once perfect machines that had tended the planet lay corroded, their functions corrupted by time and cosmic radiation. And yet, within the ruins, faint light glowed. The last remnants of the Necron command network, flickering like dying stars. Szarekh descended alone. He walked through the silence of a dead civilization, his footsteps echoing against metal carved with his own name. He touched the walls of his throne chamber and felt nothing. Even memory had cooled into stone. He stood before his throne, a structure of black metal shaped like a rising sun. And for the first time in a million ages, he spoke aloud. "I have returned." His voice was quiet, a whisper of static through the chamber. It was not command, not triumph, but confession. From across the galaxy, his signal spread. Not an order, but a presence, a pulse through the Necron command protocols, ancient and unmistakable. Dynasties felt it like a memory, a vibration in their logic cores. Some knelt instantly, recognizing the return of their god-king. Others resisted, their corrupted programming unable to comprehend. A few, long mad, mistook the signal for invasion and prepared for war. But the name carried weight even in madness. Every Necron knew it, though few remembered why. Szarekh, the silent king, the first and last of his kind. He did not seek to rebuild the empire of old, he sought understanding. The galaxy he had returned to was not the one he had left, and he had no wish to rule the ashes of a new age. He traveled from world to world, observing the young species that now claimed dominion. He saw the Eldar still mourning their fall, their civilization shattered by their own desires. He saw the orcs thriving in endless violence, the last living echo of a war long ended. He saw mankind, divided yet unyielding, building empires of faith and steel. And in all of them he saw fragments of his own past. The same ambition, the same blindness, the same yearning for eternity. The king felt no hatred, only recognition. On one world he found a tomb awakening out of sequence, its guardians malfunctioning, its command codes fractured. The Necrons within had become feral, their logic eroded by time. They slaughtered all intruders, even their own kind, worshipping the tomb's stasis core as a god. Szarekh entered their midst without weapon or command. When they turned upon him, he spoke a single word in a voice that carried the weight of galaxies. They stopped. Their eyes flickered. Then they knelt. For though their minds were shattered, some memory still recognized their maker. He looked upon them with no pride, only sorrow. They were his children, broken, loyal, lost. He restored their programming and left them behind, guardians once more, unaware of the tears that metal could not shed. Everywhere he went, he found the same truth. The galaxy had forgotten the Necrons' name, but not their shadow. Civilizations told stories of ghosts made of bronze and emerald light. They called them reapers, demons, deathless kings. And perhaps they were not wrong. But the Silent King knew there was more at stake than myth. The galaxy's balance was fragile once again. The warp gods feasted upon mortal souls as the Citan once had. The same cycle was unfolding, hunger feeding on faith, faith feeding on fear. And once again the universe was sliding toward ruin. Szarekh turned his gaze to the stars. He had once brought death to all creation in pursuit of immortality. Now he would bring purpose to death itself. The Necrons would awaken not to conquer, but to restore what had been broken. They would bring order where chaos reigned, and in doing so, perhaps they would finally find redemption. For the first time in 10 million years, the Silent King felt resolve. Not pride, not vengeance, but clarity. He understood what eternity was for. The galaxy turned once more. Stars burned, civilizations rose and fell, and in the cold places between, the Necrons awoke. Not all at once, never all at once. But enough. From the depths of forgotten tomb worlds, from the sands of dead planets and the hollow hearts of asteroids, they emerged. Legions of living metal, moving in silence across the void. Their eyes burned with green fire, their minds pulsed with ancient purpose. To the races of the modern age, they were an impossibility. The dead made gods, the past walking once more. To the Necrons, this was not a return. It was continuation. The dream that had begun beneath a cruel sun 10 million years before was not yet over. Everywhere across the stars, dynasties rose. On the irradiated plains of Mekhet, the tomb of the Pharaoh Imhotep, the Stormlord erupted from beneath the crust, lightning tearing across the atmosphere as stasis fields failed. His legions emerged in perfect formation, banners of crackling light rising into the storm. He gazed upon the galaxy and declared it faithless, a place in need of order. And so, he began his crusade. On the world of Szarekh, a dynasty of philosophers awoke, their lords driven not by conquest but by curiosity. They studied the new galaxy like archaeologists unearthing a distorted reflection of their own past. Their tomb ships drifted among the stars like great silver cathedrals gathering data, watching silently as humanity and Xenos alike fought meaningless wars. In the ruins of Mandragora, a Necron lord rose whose mind had decayed into madness. He believed himself still at war with the old ones. To him, every living thing was the enemy, every heartbeat a reminder of failure. His legions scoured entire sectors clean, exterminating billions to satisfy the ghost of a war no one else remembered. Each dynasty was different, a mirror cracked into 1,000 fragments, each reflecting eternity from a different angle. Some sought to restore the empire of old. Some dreamed of new purpose. Others wandered the void, aimless and broken, haunted by what they once were. And above them all, unseen yet ever present, moved the Silent King. He watched as his children woke, as they rebuilt their worlds and reignited their forges. He saw in them both glory and tragedy. They were magnificent, perfect engines of order and endurance. But they were also bound by the same curse he had tried to escape. They were immortal without meaning. Their perfection was still hollow. He did not command them. Not yet. The time for empire had passed. This was the age of reckoning. Szarekh moved among the stars like a ghost of divinity, restoring what balance he could. He destroyed dynasties that had fallen into madness, silenced those who would bring ruin for pride alone, and in their place he nurtured the few who remembered what they had once sought, not domination but survival. For though his heart was cold and his soul long gone, the king remembered what it had felt like to be mortal. He remembered the cruelty of a dying sun, the shortness of breath, the desperation of those who feared the dark. And so he understood the younger races better than they could ever understand him. He saw in their wars the same envy that had once damned his own kind. He saw in their faith the same blindness, and though he pitied them, he knew what must be done. If the galaxy was to endure, it needed order once more. The Necrons became that order, not all, not willingly, but inevitably. Their awakening brought quiet to sectors long drowned in chaos, where orcs waged endless war. Necron tomb ships descended from the sky and silenced the noise with cold precision. Where chaos cults raised their icons to the warp, they found themselves disintegrated by gauss fire before their prayers were finished. Even the Imperium of Man, vast and crumbling, began to whisper of green ghosts. Silent angels of death who came without warning and left nothing behind but stillness. To the living, they were horror. To the silent king, they were harmony. For every act of destruction was in truth a restoration, the galaxy returning to its natural, inevitable silence. And yet, not all Necrons obeyed. Some dynasties rebelled against the king's vision, unwilling to accept the quiet order he offered. They remembered power, not purpose. They remembered empire, not redemption. And so civil wars erupted once more, ancient rivalries reignited, gods of metal clashing beneath suns that had forgotten their names. Across those battlefields marched immortals who no longer understood why they fought. Their weapons could unmake worlds, their strategies were flawless, yet their victories meant nothing. It was the same cycle repeating, eternity devouring itself again. Szarekh watched it unfold and felt the faint echo of despair, the ghost of emotion in a being that no longer possessed a soul. He had awoken his people to reclaim the galaxy, but perhaps the galaxy was never meant to be reclaimed. Perhaps it had moved beyond them. He traveled then to the outer edges of the galactic rim, where the stars thinned and the dark stretched forever. From there he looked inward upon the spiral of creation, the flickering of a million suns, the endless dance of life and death. He spoke aloud to no one, yet his voice carried through the void. I have given my people eternity, and still they suffer. I have conquered gods, and still the void is hungry. Perhaps the lesson was never to master the galaxy, but to listen to it. In that silence, he finally understood. Eternity was not conquest. It was continuity, the quiet endurance of all things. And so the Necrons remained. Not rulers, not saviors, but constants, the quiet beneath the storm. Their tomb worlds pulsed like green hearts scattered through the dark, beating to a rhythm that would outlast all others. Their ships drifted through the void like memories, watching, waiting, recording the rise and fall of the galaxy's fleeting children. Empires would continue to be born and die. Eldar, orcs, humans, tyranids, demons. They would wage their wars, cry their prayers, burn their stars. And when they were gone, the Necrons would still be there, untouched, eternal. Perhaps that was their curse, perhaps it was their purpose. In the grim darkness of the far future, they would be the Watchers, the sentinels of silence, the memory of what the galaxy once was. Far away on a forgotten world beneath a dead sun, a Necron warrior stood guard before a sealed gate. It had not moved in 1,000 centuries. Dust lay thick on its armor, its optics burned faintly in the gloom. It did not know why it stood there, only that it must. Duty had replaced thought, purpose had replaced need. And somewhere in a place beyond thought, a faint whisper lingered, a memory of warmth, of breath, of life. But the warrior did not stir. It would stand there forever if forever would have it, for that was the way of its kind. The stars might fade, and still the Necrons would remain, waiting for a dawn that would never come. In the end, there is only silence, and in that silence the eternal empire endures. And so, traveler of the far future, the galaxy falls quiet once more. The Necrons return to their endless vigil, neither living nor dead, neither gods nor ghosts. They do not dream, and yet they remember. Perhaps somewhere beneath the stars one still stirs, watching, waiting, listening to the heartbeat of eternity. Sleep well beneath their gaze, for even in the grim darkness of the far future, there is still peace and silence. Now tell me, traveler, which story should I whisper next? The rise of the Primarchs? The birth of the Chaos Gods? Or perhaps the fall of Kydia? Leave your suggestion below and join the Eternal Watch, so that when the next tale begins, you'll be here to dream with us again.